When Daniel Morgan was 8 years old, he lost both of his parents in a car accident. Everything changed overnight. His grandfather, Walter Morgan, took him in without hesitation. Walter was already 68, living alone in a quiet farmhouse on the edge of town. Money was tight. The house was old. But Daniel never went hungry. Every morning, Grandpa Walter woke before sunrise, packed Daniel's lunch, drove him to school, and reminded him of the same thing. "You are never a burden." Daniel believed him. Unfortunately, the rest of the family didn't. Walter had 2 adult children, Daniel's Uncle Stephen and Aunt Linda. They rarely visited unless they needed money or wanted Grandpa to help with something. Whenever Daniel was around, they whispered just loudly enough for him to hear. "He's Walter's charity case. He isn't really one of us. Poor Walter is spending his retirement raising someone else's kid." Daniel pretended the words didn't hurt. But they did. Years passed. Daniel graduated from high school with honors and earned a scholarship to college. Grandpa Walter sat proudly in the front row. Neither Stephen nor Linda attended. After graduation, Daniel became a civil engineer. He bought Grandpa a new pickup truck, repaired the old farmhouse, and visited every weekend. Walter often smiled and said, "I always knew you'd build things that mattered." When Walter passed away at 92, Daniel was devastated. The funeral was barely over before the arguments began. Stephen wanted to sell the farmhouse immediately. Linda wanted to auction Grandpa's antiques. Neither seemed interested in remembering the man. Only in dividing what he had left behind. At the attorney's office, everyone gathered for the reading of the will. Stephen leaned back confidently. "I'm sure Dad split everything equally." Linda nodded. "That's only fair." Daniel stayed silent. He expected very little. The family attorney adjusted his glasses. "There is one personal letter Mr. Walter Morgan instructed me to read aloud before discussing the estate." The room quieted. The attorney unfolded the handwritten pages. Walter's familiar handwriting filled the paper. "If you're hearing this, it means I've finally gone fishing somewhere with no bad weather." A few people smiled through their tears. Then the letter became more serious. "I've listened for years while some of you called Daniel my charity case." Stephen shifted uncomfortably. Linda looked away. The attorney continued. "You were wrong." The room became perfectly still. Charity is giving something expecting nothing back. Daniel gave me purpose after I thought my best years were behind me. Silence. He wasn't my burden. He was my blessing. Daniel lowered his head. His eyes filled with tears. The attorney turned the page. "Now it's time for me to return the favor." Stephen folded his arms. "Can we get to the will?" The attorney looked directly at him. "We're about to." He opened the final envelope Walter had left behind. Inside was one document. One sentence. And one signature. The attorney looked around the room before speaking. Mr. Walter Morgan instructed that this statement be read exactly as written. He cleared his throat. Then read the words that made the entire courtroom fall silent. "The person you called my charity case, is the only heir to my estate." The courtroom was silent. For several long seconds, no one moved. Stephen was the first to speak. "What?" Linda leaned forward. "That has to be a joke." The attorney calmly shook his head. "It is not." He placed the signed will on the table. Mr. Walter Morgan left his farmhouse, investment accounts, savings, and personal property entirely to Daniel Morgan. Stephen stood up. "This is ridiculous. I'm his son." The judge looked at him. "Sit down, Mr. Morgan." Reluctantly, Stephen sat. The attorney opened another envelope. "There is one final letter your father instructed me to read if anyone challenged his decision." He unfolded the paper. Walter's familiar handwriting filled the page. To my children. If you're upset by my decision, ask yourselves one question. The attorney looked around the courtroom. Who visited when there wasn't money involved? Silence. Who repaired my roof without being asked? Who drove me to doctor's appointments? Who shoveled my driveway after every snowstorm? Daniel quietly lowered his eyes. Those weren't sacrifices to him. They were simply what family did. The attorney continued. The answer isn't the person who shares my last name. It's the person who shared my life. Linda began crying. Stephen stared at the floor. Walter's letter wasn't finished. Daniel never acted like he was earning an inheritance. He acted like he already had one. He called me Grandpa. He spent time with me. He listened to my stories, even when he'd heard them 100 times. The courtroom remained silent. Then came the final paragraph. Some people inherit because they're relatives. Daniel inherits because he became my family every single day. The attorney folded the letter. That concludes Mr. Morgan's statement. No one spoke. Stephen finally looked at Daniel. I didn't know you were doing all of that. Daniel answered honestly. I wasn't doing it for Grandpa's money. I know. For the first time, Stephen sounded ashamed. I barely visited. Daniel didn't argue. There was nothing to argue about. The truth had already been spoken. After the hearing, reporters waiting outside asked Daniel whether he felt he had won. He smiled gently. I didn't win today. I lost my grandfather. The microphones lowered. The inheritance isn't the part that matters. A reporter asked. Then what does? Daniel looked back at the courthouse. My grandfather spent years making sure I never believed I was anyone's charity case. He smiled. Today he kept that promise one last time. Months later, Daniel restored the old farmhouse instead of selling it. He converted the barn into a community workshop where teenagers could learn woodworking, welding, and basic home repair, skills Grandpa Walter had taught him. Above the entrance hung a wooden sign carved with Walter's favorite words. Love isn't measured by what you give people. It's measured by how often you show up. Every Saturday morning, the workshop filled with young people learning new skills. On the wall, beside an old photograph of Grandpa Walter, was another framed note in his handwriting. The greatest inheritance I ever received wasn't money. It was someone believing I belonged. Daniel read those words before opening the workshop each week. He smiled every time. Because the people who had once called him a charity case had been wrong all along. He had never been living on his grandfather's charity. He had been living in his grandfather's love. And in the end, that proved to be the most valuable inheritance anyone could ever receive.